My guest on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast is Imogen Ley-Clowes. Now, Imogen is the founder and creative lead of Imo Studio, a London-based branding studio who is now really getting deep into the topic that we are talking about here today, the impact of AI on branding. We're going to go deep into a whole bunch of things here because we have to. It's that time when we need to kind of really try and sort of figure out how AI is impacting on our own brands. Imogen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks. Really looking forward to being here.
Yeah, well, this is a big, important topic. I mean, I think, we almost have to put our super serious hats on, but part of it is kind of crystal ball, though, isn't it, really? And we're going to get on to kind of how potentially people can kind of take this forward. And obviously, we've got a lot of marketers, business owners, entrepreneurs listening to this thinking, it's coming. I know it's going to impact on my brand, but I don't know where to start and I don't know how. So can we kind of sort of take a few steps backwards and I guess kind of set the scene in terms of what do we mean by branding? What actually is branding and brand?
Oh, yeah, such a good question. So your brand, I think if we think about it in super simple terms, is the character of your company. We as humans, we all have characters. People expect us to behave in a certain way, to sound a certain way, to dress a certain way. You have kind of strands of that. So if you're going to a smart party, you'd wear a different outfit, but you'd walk in and you'd still be recognized as you. If you start speaking in a very different type of way, people can't connect with that. And it's the same in branding. You have your little different outfits of whether, you might be talking to your investors, or you might be talking to your younger client base or your older client base, but it is still very much you as a brand and very recognizable. So it's about creating a character that people can connect with, recognize, and hopefully like.
Now that takes it way beyond the old kind of, I guess, definition or maybe misunderstanding, because it never was this, but it's the colors, it's the logo, it's all that kind of real cliche. There's my brand, look at my lovely logo. There's something a lot more psychological going on here, a lot more human, isn't there? It's a lot deeper than I guess a lot of people think.
Yeah, I think those are kind of the ingredients, the tangible assets, and they're easier for people to understand. So they're often the things that people latch onto. And yeah, they're really important, but that is not what a brand is. I think it was, there's lots of famous sayings by kind of branding and marketing gurus. I think Jeff Bezos is one that sticks in my mind, probably because it's quite short. And he says a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So essentially that is your reputation.
So character kind of almost comes through, I guess, from the collective of people in the business. So, I mean, if you're a large business, obviously there's a company culture, there's a certain style, a certain tone of voice, which I guess comes through not only, as you say, in the assets, but in the individuals you encounter, either the salesperson or customer service or, whoever it might be, somebody's, sort of storefront, if it's retail, that kind of thing. So it's that sort of human interaction. Is that kind of really what we're talking about here, is how people actually also kind of convey the values and the culture of the organization? Because that would feel to me really important.
Yeah, that is hugely important. And that's why it's really hard when brands grow. When companies are quite small, if they haven't, so we call that stage of things brand strategy. So it's thinking about what your values are, what that actually means for the company, why you exist, why you're different, kind of includes your positioning. And when a company is really small and they kind of work really closely together, you can kind of get away with not having that stuff worked out, because you might be kind of hiring people that are like you, really excited about launching this company, and that comes through. And then the bigger the company gets, it gets more complicated, and you do really need to have those values nailed down. Things like having that in your kind of your hiring communications, to making sure you're getting the right cultural fit, and thinking about how everyone interacts with the customers. That kind of stuff comes across, and the brands that do that really well, they really know what they're about, and they keep educating their staff on that and involving them and doing focus groups and surveys. And yeah, a brand isn't a one and done. It's something that kind of continues to be nurtured and looked after. And it always blows my mind that people have marketing budgets, but they don't have branding budgets, or they don't. I mean, you can include your brand budget within your marketing budget, but it's sort of as a like, oh, we've done that. We're good there, but we do need to run some more Google ads. And that does slightly blow my mind.
Do you think that comes around from this kind of real short-termism? Because it feels to me like, you know, a lot of the business, if you think of, you know, say a medium-sized business, a lot of the business is going to be focused on selling stuff, whatever that is,
Hmm.
product, service, whatever. So when that happens, there is this real sort of short-term, I guess, laser focused on we've got to get boxes out the door, we've got to get
Mm.
in with these particular clients or customers. And there is almost this kind of, well, we'll do the branding stuff later. That's the longer term thing. So we can leave it to the longer term. It's almost the poor relation in some ways.
Yeah, I think people do struggle with it. I think partly it's quite difficult to, um, to define the ROI on it. It's not something that you can send out this many and you measure and the percentage is going up or down. There are ways that you can measure branding, but it is a little bit more intangible. And I think that is something that people struggle with. And it's always, is this the right time? Should we, be making more money? I think, you know, the market is getting busier and busier. There are more and more products, and the only way that you can stand out is having a brand. And some people I talk to understand that very early on, and even if they're doing quite small things, their company grows with that in mind. And others are all about the product and as you say, kind of getting boxes out the door.
So I just want to press a pause button on that moment there. Having a brand is the way you differentiate in a busy market. I want people just to really hear what Imogen's just shared with us there, because that is absolutely fundamental, isn't it? In a busy market, your brand is your difference. I mean, because people will always, sort of argue, oh, well, it's our people, or it's, our products are more professional, they're better, they're strong. They're not. We're all the same. The products and services, they're just commodity items. I mean, let's face it, in
Mm.
most markets, I can buy down the road what I can buy from you. It's just the nature of the world. But the brand, that's a really interesting one. This whole thing about, Jeff Bezos saying it's what is talked about when you're not in the room. So this thing kind of goes almost sort of over and beyond the experience of the product or service, doesn't it? Is it kind of, it becomes a feeling in the individual when they've kind of said, okay, I'm buying into you guys because you feel like you're a little bit different. It's something that
Yeah, so
happens
it's
inside the customer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all about connection. And I think, part of the work that we do a lot of is audience work. And I think lots of different things in and around branding do that. So marketing, obviously, audience work is really important, but understanding what it is that your audiences are looking for, where they hang out, where they shop, what's important to them, are they environmentally conscious? Do they not care about that? Are they very price conscious? And making sure that your whole positioning with your brand and your messaging is talking to them. And I think actually that's something that we'll come on to that I think is really important about how, sorry, my headphones are going to fall out, how AI is also changing that as well. But I think, yeah, people want to feel that a brand understands them, and also it's becoming their friend. I was at a panel discussion last night, actually, which is quite timely, and it was all talking about trends of 2026. And I hope I get this right, the CEO of Hearst magazine, Liz someone, anyway, she was very good, was talking about things that have kind of worked really well for them last year. So one of their magazines is Good Housekeeping magazines, which as a print magazine you would expect to be struggling, and it's doing really well. And what they've done is kind of gone back to basics and spoken to their customers, run events, and they're making friends with their customers. And I think that is something that's really important. People are expecting a lot more from brands now. And they want to feel like they get them, that they're included, they're invited to those parties or those events, or the social media live thingy-mabobbies. And that's been really effective for them. And I think that's a trend we're going to see more of. Brands really kind of come down to their customers' level and not be this thing up here that's kind of quite abstract.
I mean, there's a load of kind of little details in what you've just said there, which I think are fascinating. I mean, one sort of particularly that is kind of coming through to me is this, if there's anybody within a business who says, oh, the brand stuff, it's really not that important. And then potentially there might be, say, a salesperson, I'm not dissing salespeople, but if there's a salesperson then goes out, tries to talk to a customer, and there's no kind of brand essence that's already arrived. So that that person hasn't been warmed up by marketing to be receptive to this salesperson. They are going to be pushing water uphill, aren't they? It's going to be a hard job. Whereas actually, if the brand thing has happened in advance of that sales visit, And this is surely where the real value comes to people who say, oh, no, I don't really believe in brand, or it's not that important, let's just get out and sell. It's going to be such an easier commercial transaction to do if the branding is already in place and it's already been sold in, and somebody's already thought, I like the feel of this. It's making me feel good to kind of talk to this brand. It's a lead thing. I think a lot of people think of branding as a backup thing, but actually it should really be there front and center, shouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, branding done well and having a good foundational strategy can save the company time and then obviously money in the long run. It just makes decisions a lot quicker because you know what your North Star is. I think coming on to that kind of salesperson pushing water uphill, they might be very talented and do a great job, but next time you talk to someone, you might have quite different experience because their interpretation of the brand or the service or whatever might be quite different. So unity is another really important thing, or we call it consistency. So having the same positive experience with the brand every time builds trust. I'm with Octopus Energy, haven't had great experience with energy companies. It's not particularly cool or sexy, but what they have done for the industry is completely transformed it, and people rave about them. Like, they have fans, and you're paying for something that's not hugely exciting.
And there's the real answer, isn't it? Really, is if you can almost be trading with that when it isn't exciting, because let's face it, most of us do have very practical kind of utility style offers. You might sort of be very proud of your product or service, but actually customer generally doesn't really care. They're doing it to solve a problem. But if you can be trading at this kind of level and actually having those sort of conversations, because the brand is so much more meaningful. And I always think, Apple is, the perfect example of this, is where, back in the day, people used to queue outside of Apple stores, from overnight to get the next version of product X, Y, or Z. And it just, that almost is the telling part of this, isn't it? If you get it right, there is that passion and drive to be involved with it.
Yeah, I think, and there have been studies done of companies that do, I don't have the figures on the top of my head, but do seriously invest in branding and how much better they do. And that is very valuable to the company.
So obviously we're here to talk about impact of AI on branding. That was the kind of the lead in at the start of the conversation. And what I'm kind of, I guess, fearing at this stage is the fact that everything we've talked about so far has been human to human interaction. Brand is all about how you, as a human, convey the story, the character, the tone, etc. And it's how it's also picked up by the human on the other side. In other words, does this potential customer or prospect like or, sort of engage with my brand story? It's very human to human. And then we introduce or drop into the mix AI. Now, this is going to get complicated. We've taken humans out of the mix for a moment. Where do we even start?
Oh, I think a great place to start is figuring out what tools are going to help your process and what tools are a bit gimmicky. And yeah, I think not using things for the sake of it. I think there is a temptation to overcomplicate things just because you can, but it doesn't always improve the final outcome, I'd say.
So again, what I'm seeing is this whole idea of process mapping. So actually understanding on a human level, what is it we do in our business? What are the processes and the flows, if you like, of activity to create something, to add value to it, to then get it to a customer, to then get the feedback, to then produce more and more efficiently, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff is process. What I'm seeing is that there's a lot of human interaction in there. And some of the best performing businesses right now are the ones who've really sorted out their efficient processes, and they're putting in place AI. And you could say, well, this isn't branding, but actually it could be. There could be some areas in here which actually do impact on brand both positively and negatively, because if they're putting automation in to become super efficient, but if in that part of the process the customer was just enjoying, and because we were a brand who didn't listen, we didn't know that the customer was actually enjoying the human interaction at that point, they're going to disappear and go somewhere else, aren't they? So we need to tread really carefully, in my mind, to kind of figure out where the tools are going to be appropriate, but actually what are we going to be using tools for? Am I kind of reading that right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think, yeah, making sure you're using AI in the right parts. So I think, things that we find it really useful for is, I think, lots of things in different industries that is quite common. So collecting information, sifting through information, transcribing things and putting that into a brief. And I think something that we're working on a lot at the moment is thinking about all our systems and how everything joins up and how that, as you say, can make things more efficient. But then we're the creative directors of that. So, you don't put all this input in and then that's the brief and you send it to the client and that's all automated. That'd be great and much quicker, but it doesn't always get it right. And you were the one in those conversations asking those questions. So you kind of understood the nuance of those answers. And I think it's always really important to, it can get you, 90% of the way there or 50% of the way, depending on what it is, but never to kind of taking that for gospel and making sure that, the human input is still there. And I think, yeah, there are so many tools out there and it can be really, really overwhelming. And I think it was about last year, every time a new tool came out, I experimented and I looked at it and all this kind of stuff. And I think my conclusion has been, largely the best tools that we use are from the traditional design tool companies, so like Adobe or Figma, because they've already got a foundational understanding of what it is that designers need and they've tweaked their process and they've improved it. But there are new tools that are kind of complement that, but most of the new tools I think have a kind of a bit of a like cheap and dirty feel to them. They're just they're sort of set up in a way that it encourages you to rip off people's work. So we kind of steer away from all of those ones and using tools just for the sake of it. And yeah, it's been interesting, and I think we're a lot more kind of sensitive to what we think will be a useful tool. And what I think is always, when something leads with the fact that they're AI, that's always a bit of a red flag for me.
It's an interesting one. There's a lovely filter there, because what you're saying then, Imogen, is the fact that if you've got an existing thing that you're doing, that's the kind of the solid platform from which you can then build AI capability rather than going for the next shiny thing. I mean, there's a big temptation, isn't there? We all do it. Like you said, you were doing it. I definitely do it. It's like, oh, that's an interesting one. I wonder what I could do with that. But that's not necessarily helpful, is it? Because it might be good for experience and kind of learning about AI, but it just layers yet another thing into what is already probably a busy day. Whereas actually what you're sort of advocating here is the fact that, as you say, with Adobe, I mean, Canva's doing it, so MailChimp's got it, a lot of these kind of marketing products, if you like, or marketing-centric products now have got AI enablement within them, and you've just got to search around a little bit. Sometimes it's thrown at you, it's right in your face. But so that's a nice kind of starting block here, isn't it? Because what we're saying is we don't tear up the playbook of how we do business. What we do is we look for where little improvements. So it's incremental improvements. Is that really what we're after here, rather than a wholesale revolution?
Yeah, I think it's thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve or what you're trying to create and what is the best tool for that. And I think traditionally, like, everything would have been done in Adobe, and now that's kind of one of 5 programs that we work in. So it is definitely shifting. And I think there's also that thing, like, going back to the like new shiny toy, certain subscriptions are quite expensive, and then something comes along that's free and you're like, oh, try that. But it's not going to be free for very long. And many of these tools, they operate on a model of like tokens. So it can actually get quite expensive quite quickly. So what's that phrase? Like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I think that very much applies with all these things. They'll lock you in and then it will probably end up being more expensive. But yeah, I think always good to experiment, but I'm just a little bit more cautious about what I spend my time experimenting with. Also, a lot of the learning, various platforms, you have to invest a bit of time to get the most out of them. So I think, guarding your time a little bit and thinking, okay, I need to create a mascot. We've got some initial sketches. What's going to be the best tool for that? And doing your research before diving in, and then spending a good amount of time really understanding how that platform works. Because I'm sure you've experimented all sorts of tools. Everyone raves about them. You go, oh, that was a bit rubbish. But like, you've spent 10 minutes on it. Like, you have to understand how all the nodes work and the prompting, and oh, it doesn't do this, but it does do this, and all that kind of stuff. And then if you spend kind of, I think, half a day on most platforms, you will really understand what it's capable of and whether that's better than what you're already using, whether that's going to complement it, and you can kind of go from there.
So I guess for a lot of people, the starting point has been, oh, let's create some content. Let's just do some writing. So we'll do our next social post in ChatGPT, or we'll get Copilot to draft something, or whatever it is. Many other services are available, but the idea being that many services are available. But the
Yeah.
idea very much being that it's kind of, I'll kind of do a prompt, and hey, I'm really good at prompting, so I can do a prompt, and there's my content, out it comes. Do you find, and do you kind of get it, examples where it's almost then we fall into our lazy trap, because it's very quick, it's very easy. I mean, it can write content, short form, long form, way quicker than any human can. But when we talked a little bit earlier about this kind of branding is a human to human interaction, and it's about the character, is it possible, would you say, from your experience and what you've done over the years, to be able to recreate the same level of quality with AI, with almost like the ultimate prompt, that would actually be as good, if not better, than a human in terms of creating branded content? Or is it just by the nature that it's a large language model, is it going to be a compromise?
Oh, that's such a good question. So you're talking about like the whole process being through AI? Oh, drop the headphone. I think possibly, but it's all about the person that is driving that and how that system is being set up. So, are you familiar with Vibe automation?
I am.
Yeah, so obviously that would be a huge part of it, how you get everything to speak to each other. I think for that to be successful, you'd need to have a really solid process anyway, and think about how that could be recreated. The thing, so you touched on there about like time, and I think that's something that is interesting, because obviously AI speeds everything up, and that can be really beneficial. I think more with things like, the rollout of a brand, for example, it's all been signed off. The thinking's been okay, great. This is going to take 2 days rather than 2 months or whatever. But in the earlier stages, I think having time and gaps between meeting is really important, because how often have you thought, oh, something's an amazing idea, and you've done a workshop with a client or something like that, and then the next day you've been on a walk, doing something completely different, and you thought about it and you thought, oh, but this company did X, Y, and Z, and potentially this could be and you've got room to ruminate on it, basically. And I think as creatives, or that's really important in our process, but also the client, they might jump on an idea in a meeting and be like, absolutely, that's the direction we can go in. If you then can create that campaign for them, and that goes out in an hour, they haven't fully thought that through. So I think that's also an interesting part of it. Everyone wants things yesterday now. Everything should be quick, and that's great in some circumstances, but also I think there should be room to think about that. But yeah, that sort of went a bit off topic to your question about, can things be fully automated or done by AI? And there was a really interesting article, I think it was in Creative Boom, and one of the creative directors of, I can't remember what it was, some American agency, was predicting the future will be one-person agencies, so they will be doing everything. And I think already in the creative industry, you've seen a drop-off of certain roles, things like art workers. So for anyone who doesn't know, art workers are the people, very important, clever people, who check everything before it goes to print and make sure everything is ready. They are the last people before something goes out the studio and something is wrong. But the capabilities of AI now are very good at doing a lot of that work. So I think that's a role that's really been impacted. I think all sorts of roles. Writers are used a lot less, because you can get 90% of the way there with AI. So you're already seeing what that looks like. But these people are really important. They might just be used a little bit less. But will there be a future when they're not needed at all? Possibly. And I think that's pretty terrifying. Trying to be optimistic about it, but it does terrify me.
It is certainly changing and evolving, and I think it was almost like we're on this this train that is just starting to increase pace, and it's like you either get on the train and you have the ride, or you're left behind. It just feels like this is not a negotiable thing. When I say this, people say, "Oh, it's all very well for you, Neil," and blah blah blah. And I think, no, I'm not saying this in a kind of like join me kind of thing. It's just I think it's going to be the reality of it, whether we like it or not. And I kind of embrace change, but a lot of people don't. They don't want the stuff to be moving at this kind of pace. And I guess there's, from what you've just said there, a bit of a concern in terms of the value that is put on branding, creative agencies, marketers in general. Because if we can turn stuff around within seconds, and it used to take a week, the value there that's perceived from the other side, so the client, the line manager, potentially the customer as well, surely goes down by definition, because we've only taken a few moments to create that. So I'm not going to pay for this, I'm not going to pay for that. Are we devaluing ourselves by using AI?
I think if we split it out, so execution is being devalued, design is being democratized. So there's the rise of the Canva designer. So do you even need branding agencies to do it if people can do it in-house? And I think two separate points here. I think the rise of the Canva designer, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think the nicest analogy I've heard is if you're given the keys to an F1 car, like, doesn't mean you're going to be able to drive it around the track without crashing it. I definitely would crash it. And I think it's a similar sort of thing. You do see some quite scary things coming out of Canva, but then also, fantastic to give people access to do that. But I think the value is moving up the chain. The value is all about the strategy. It's all about the thinking. It's all about what we're trying to achieve.
So there's an interesting one. And I think maybe it was time. I mean, maybe I'm going to be a bit controversial here, but maybe it was time that those kind of more administrative things, both in agency and client side, were actually dealt with through some kind of machine, whatever you want to call that. But to give us time and space to be able to do the higher value stuff, which is the thinking, it is the branding, it is that conceptual thinking and strategizing and all these lovely big words that mean you have to sort of sit back and ponder life and the universe and everything. But is that where you see this going? I mean, because it feels like as we're starting to get quicker and quicker, I often have a conversation with my wife about this one. She says, yeah, but all you're doing, Neil, is you get more efficient and more kind of effective at this stuff because you're using more and more AI. All you're doing is you're adding more stuff into the day. It doesn't mean you get out more. It doesn't mean you get more leisure time, which you were promising you would. It's like, yeah, you fill the spaces with other stuff, don't you? I mean, is there a danger here that we're just going to get caught up in this great big ball of sort of, those old style cartoons where it was a big cloud of dust and you had all these arms and legs kind of coming out of this cloud of dust as it was kind of swirling around? It feels like, are we just kind of spinning ourselves to oblivion here? Or is it going to settle, do you think, and people are going to figure out, actually, the time now that I'm saving is going to be for more valuable things? Do you have hope that it might go that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting what your wife's saying, because I find we save a lot of time with certain tasks, but then I always fill up the time with something else. So a really simple example is if it's quicker to do competitive research, you're going to do more competitive research. So the client gets more value, because people have asked me, if you're automating more of this stuff using AI, would you adjust your prices? And no, we wouldn't, because we're being able to do a better job. The client is getting more value out of us because of the way that we're using, and we're always striving to be better. And I think that's why we kind of wouldn't adjust. But yeah, I think there's always more to be done, and because something is a bit quicker, you'll focus on another part. But I think going back to kind of a previous point, I think there are certain parts of the design process, so saving out all the logos, for example, that used to be something quite time consuming. You'd save out multiple different logos, different colors, different formats. That's something that literally can be done in the click of a button now. That is fabulous. That's a great thing. I don't think anyone particularly enjoyed that. But then if we stick on the theme of logos, for example, if people want everything done really quickly and it's approved and that's it and it's out, and I've worked at agencies before where you've spent 2 weeks artworking or like finalizing a logo, and this isn't even with the client, because the client, they don't really notice the kind of finer details, but you're looking at the spacing between letters, you're looking at the curve, you're looking at the pixels, and all of the best logos out there by big companies, they will have been through this process, and that is really important. It's minute details, it's very, very detailed, and I think that kind of craft is going to be lost if things carry on, or maybe they're not going to be lost, but it will be people sticking their head out and saying, no, we're going to stop, we're going to look at the logo for a week. And I can see that, in the fast-paced world won't go down very well.
That's interesting. So you don't see a time where you have the artworking logo, artworking agent looking at the logo then, and because they can do it in like a microsecond, it is just going to be potentially, as they get more and more sophisticated, more and more nuanced with the style of the brand or the style of the agency in terms of how we look at things, because they can learn and they'll never forget. If you brief and brief and brief and brief and brief, that brief is going to be so solid. They surely are going to be more efficient, more capable, and at least able to, I'm being controversial here, but at least able to do that craft as well as a human art worker, surely.
Well, let's see. But I think the thing about logos is that you can have your brief, but every logo is different. So the spacing, so the rules around lowercase to uppercase logos, the way that you would adjust those spacing, that's quite a simple rule, would be different. And I think it's also thinking about looking at it. So you're looking at it, you're printing out, you're looking at it far away, you're looking at it close up, all those kind of stuff. So it'd be interesting to see how that capability develops. But yeah, I think at the moment it's quite far off that kind of super refinement, kind of high level work. I think I was looking at some trends, to prepare for this, and there's one called something like luxury craft or something. Have you come across that?
No.
It's when people are really leaning into craft and things that are obviously handmade and a little bit imperfect and things like that, and it's as a result of everything being super slick and smooth on AI. And yeah, that's a trend that's on the rise, which I have seen. I just hadn't called it that, but I quite like that.
So maybe then, is there a case then, as we kind of all get, because let's face it, this thing is not going away, so it's how you evolve and develop with it, or consciously without it. Is there going to be, do you think, a case of this thing will go full circle, and even though we might have avatar art workers, we might have avatar competitor research agents, and all these AIs that are kind of doing various different specialist roles, ultimately what we might get back to is an agency or more a business, and potentially, as you're saying, with this kind of luxury craft thing, that actually is human and charges more because it is human. Do you think ultimately we might sort of get a little bit tired of this?
That would be interesting. Yeah, everyone gets so sick of automation and slickness and all that kind of stuff. If you're doing everything by hand and being really slow, that's a great standout of quality. But yeah, I think, yeah, let's see.
Because I guess there's some industries where that would make absolute sense, where the time taken to consider the offer or the product is actually done in such a way that you need time, you want time, because that is the thing that absolutely applies. And I guess if you're in a manufacturing environment where you have to have 10 million cycles of a product before it's actually coming through the test facility, I mean, that actually needs time as well. So I think maybe time is one of these things that we're going to have to, I guess, juggle with and play with, because in some ways it's a positive if you take longer to do something, because that 10 million cycles of testing mean that product's safer. So great, I'll buy that one rather than this one, which has been tested with AI, and it says, within a millisecond, it says it's safe. Well, I think I'll go for the other one. So I think there probably will be examples, won't there, that will still sustain themselves through this wave of stuff. But the thing I was wanting to come round to really kind of get your view on is this whole idea of, say, customer facing AI and how that can actually portray a brand. Because I've got a number of clients who are now playing and toying with the idea of having AI avatars on their website. I'm going to do one over Christmas. It's going to be a Neil on my website that you can talk to with it before you kind of get to me, and just kind of playing and exploring this thing. But it's clearly not me. It clearly is an avatar, because the facial expressions and the kind of the stuff in it doesn't actually sound particularly like me, because of all the kind of weird ways that I do stuff, because I'm a human. But how is that going to play out, do you think, in the short term or in the near term for a brand? Because if we're putting things out there that are avatars, chatbots, AI enabled kind of customer service and things like that, those, because we've said that humans are the conveyor of the brand. If we've got AIs there, no matter how well we're prompting them, are they going to really sort of step on the toes of our brand credentials?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think what you're describing there is, I think people are using that to, get across information easily when you're not available. So someone might look on your website and you give them a little bit of information. So it's just a tool for speeding that up. Or ones that I've seen, normally they're, customer services. So you want to know when let's go back to Octopus, when your price is going to increase. So I think it's helping you get where you need to be quicker, but isn't necessarily a really powerful, juicy brand experience that you're going to come away from that and be like, oh my God, they're the best brand ever. I think having a query dealt with quickly is helpful. And it's like, great. And that's what people expect. And I think people's expectations of brands have increased. And I think that's what the bigger brands are slightly struggling, because smaller brands, it's much easier to bring in AI across all of your systems and, get that all working really seamlessly. Bigger businesses, obviously, there might be certain levels of approval before you're allowed to use a tool. There's a much bigger app or website that you need to pull that in and through. So they're always a little bit behind on that. So I think, to me, that's not really kind of the core brand experience. That's a tool to kind of help you avoid having a call center, basically.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I know that we're talking, theoretically, because nobody knows how this is going to play out. Nobody. I mean, you'll always see it on social media. You're always going to see, oh, well, I'm a specialist and an expert in this, that, and that. Nobody knows. We as humanity have never been here before.
The amount of AI experts you see, and yes, AI has been around a lot longer than most people think, but still, like, it is relatively new. So that does always make me laugh when people say I'm an AI expert. I'm like,
but do you feel hopeful about the future, and how do you kind of see this sort of playing out, do you think, within, let's just use the big phrase, branding? How do you see kind of AI sort of impacting? Because inevitably it already is. I mean, it already is having, with some of the examples we've said. But do you feel positive and hopeful, or is there concern?
I think I am concerned. It is really exciting, and I think we're doing quite a lot of changes in our business at the moment, and I like change. It really excites me. I feel very energized. So I think on a personal level, I'm feeling quite positive this week. But I also think there are some things in the industry that aren't going particularly well. So I think there have always been people that rip off other people's work, but that is so easy to do now. A really good example that I saw this week was there's a peanut butter brand, I don't know them particularly well, called like Manny Life or something. And the founder of it, called Stu, I think it was, he posted a picture on LinkedIn, and someone had taken their product shots of, someone or actually it was the founder holding a jar of peanut butter, and it was coming out, it looked great. Anyway, someone had totally ripped that off, and they had just changed the label, and apart from that, it was pretty much the same. And the founder, his face had changed. Anyway, he wrote quite a funny comment of like, oh, a better looking me. But the guy was wearing a bucket hat, and the bucket hat had the logo of the original peanut butter on. And when they changed this thing, they hadn't updated that. So you could see, like, absolutely no argument. They had completely ripped it off. And that's a really easy, like, two-prompt thing to do. So I think I'm quite worried about it in that sense. And I think I'm quite worried about what's happening to the industry in terms of talent coming up. A lot of the jobs junior designer jobs are being replaced by AI. And if there isn't talent coming up, then, how is the industry going to grow and survive? But on the junior designer side, I think there's also junior designers that I've come across that are fluent in AI, and they are super, super impressive. And they've grown up in a different era. And I think they can be, technically a lot more advanced than a senior designer, for example, but they don't have that kind of grounding and learning all those mistakes you make as a junior designer that are fundamental to kind of how you work now and how you present. So I think that area is really interesting. And I think there proactively needs to be work done in the industry to kind of make sure there's still space for junior designers and talent coming up. So yeah, these are the kind of areas that are worrying me a little bit. But yeah, I think what a brand looks like is fundamentally going to change. So historically, brands were, well, we talked about that at the top, but a lot of it was the fixed assets, so the color palettes, the logos, all that kind of stuff that people think of. And I think that stuff is going to become less important. So as brands kind of shift from static identities, they're going to become like dynamic interfaces, for example. So even if you think about like hyper personalization, I mean, that's something that you can already do. I'm not a Google ad expert, but I know you can test Google ads in real time and change the headlines and see which ones are working well. So that's an example of kind of real-time personalization. But thinking, what if brands could exist and they could be a different brand for each person, because they know so much about you. They know what the calls to action needs to be, why you're buying this product. Is it price? Are you worried about the vitamins in this snack? Is that the most important thing? And they will feed you headlines that lean into that pain point. So I think, it's going to be very different. I think brands are going to learn a lot more quickly from their customers and be able to adapt to that. So I think it's going to look very, very different in, 5-10 years.
And as you say, if you're anything like Imogen and I, and you love change and you love this kind of evolving world that we're kind of, well, not entering into, but we are in now, then this is super exciting, both positive and challenge as well, all in equal measure. I want to put people in contact with Imogen. I want to make sure that they can, if they wish to, follow on this conversation with you directly, obviously through Imo Studio, but also if they want to connect with you on LinkedIn, is that okay to kind of follow your work and your thinking?
Send me a message. Yeah, so I'm quite active on LinkedIn. Just search for my name. I believe I'm the only Imogen Ley-Clowes. I got married last year and we smushed our names together. So created a new name, new brand. And then, our website is imostudio.co.uk, and you can see a little bit more of the work that we do. There's a bit of stuff on AI there as well. We're starting a new blog series that will be talking a lot about that. So feel free to sign up for that.
Wonderful. Imogen, you've given us so much to think about today. So I think everyone's going off thinking, oh crikey, I thought this was going to be easy. It's just branding. No, it's everywhere. It's everything. It's everything we do.
Yeah, I think actually that's a good point to end on. I think, people's understanding of branding, that it should be this really quick, easy thing, because loads of other things are really quick and easy now. They kind of want a click of a button and to have a brand. And actually it is a conversation. It's thinking, it's learning, it's research, it's that process. And that, the best brands that we create are for founders and marketing teams that are really engaged in the process, because they are giving us loads of insight. And that kind of collaboration is where you get the best results. So even if you could just click a button and get a great brand, which isn't possible at the moment, by the way, I think you would lose out a lot of that value.
Imogen, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.